Prime Minister Imran Khan, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. Now, the first thing that I noticed when I entered this Prime Minister's office was a picture of the founder of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Tell me to what extent you think your government has followed his vision of a Pakistan where minorities enjoy the same rights as the majority of the country.
Well, let me just first give the philosophy of Quaid-e-Azam, who was the founder of Pakistan. He believed in a state based on the principles of the first state of Islam, which was in Medina. So the state of Medina was built on certain principles. And our founder, Quaid-e-Azam, he always wanted Pakistan to follow the same principles. So what were the principles? Number one, justice, rule of law. Number two, a humane state, a welfare state. Number three, a state that laid emphasis on education and research so that it could move forward. The reason we were left behind by the Western civilization, because the Muslim world stopped the emphasis on education and science. And he believed in meritocracy. He did not believe in hereditary politics. He believed in democracy. So these were the principles which our leader derived these principles from the first state of Medina, the Muslim state, formed in Medina by a holy prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so in that state, in the state of Medina, the minorities were equal citizens. And no one could be forced into religion or out of religion.
Okay, so what is your government doing to ensure that minorities in Pakistan get equal rights? There was a gruesome attack on the Hazara minority in Pakistan about a few days ago. In fact, the family members of the victims are still protesting. They have pledged not to bury the bodies of those who died until you meet them and until the culprits are brought to justice.
It's a very unfortunate incident. It stems from the legacy of the 1980s, when the Afghan Jihad started in early 80s, and when Pakistan participated in the Jihad. One of the worst outcomes of the Jihad was sectarianism in Pakistan. And not just sectarianism, but militant sectarianism. And so this is, we have been lumbered with this legacy. We had these militant sectarian groups, and the Hazara Shia community in Balochistan was targeted by these extremist sectarian groups, Sunni extremist group. So it was very unfortunate, because unfortunately, not just that we had these extreme sectarian groups, these groups have morphed with ISIS or Daesh. And so this horrible attack was claimed by Daesh, ISIS. And, I can understand the pain of the Hazara community, because the last time I was in opposition when they were targeted, I actually went there, and they too, they didn't want to bury the dead until there were certain promises given. And, we will assure them of complete support and protection.
So Pakistan is going to do whatever it takes to protect the minorities of the country?
We believe that minorities in Pakistan are equal citizens, and the job of the state is to protect them. We had another terrible incident when one religious political party targeted a mandir, a worship place of the Hindus in Karak. And the government has immediately taken action. It's arrested everyone, and our government has pledged to rebuild that temple.
Okay, now, Prime Minister, as you know, we all are facing an unprecedented coronavirus pandemic. But before I come to that, there's another pandemic which requires our attention, the pandemic of Islamophobia. You are one of the few leaders in the world who spoke against the rise of Islamophobia in the world. Now tell me, how concerned are you about the rise of Islamophobia in the western part of the world, and what would it take to contain it?
Well, you know, I'm probably more aware of Islamophobia in the West, and more aware than Muslim leaders who have not lived outside their countries, or who have not spent time in Western countries. Because I used to play professional cricket in England. I went to university there. So I spent a lot of time in England. And I saw the evolution of Islamophobia in Western countries. And if I have to put a date on it, it was Salman Rushdie's, that awful character Salman Rushdie. He wrote this book which insulted our Holy Prophet ﷺ. And since then, two things happened. One, that in the West, they could not understand the reaction of the Muslims when our Holy Prophet was insulted. And because they could not understand it, they believed that Islam was against freedom of speech. So they put it on freedom of speech, that the man can write anything in a book, not understanding the love and respect and reverence we have for our Holy Prophet. On the other hand, the Muslims living in Western countries got very agitated. And some of them demonstrated there, and a few even became violent. And they believed that it was deliberately targeting the Muslim community. The fact was that the Western people do not understand, they cannot understand the way we feel for our Prophet, because they do not consider their own holy, sacred entities the way we do. In fact, they do not treat religion like we do, especially in Europe. And so therefore, this big gap of misunderstanding between the two communities, between the Muslims living in the Western communities and the Western communities, this gap grew. And unfortunately, it was not addressed. It should have been addressed by leaders of the Muslim world, who should have got together and explained on world forums like the European Union, like the United Nations. They should have explained to the Western countries that there are two things which the Muslims will, if you, under the garb of freedom of speech in the West, caricaturize, insult, mock either our Holy Quran, which for us is divine word, or our Holy Prophet, then there will be a reaction. And so we should have just stressed to them that these two issues should not, under the garb of freedom of speech, be ridiculed or insulted. Unfortunately, we did not. The Muslim leadership did not do so. So therefore, this gap over a period of time, and especially after 9/11, this just has grown more and more. And so has Islamophobia. This gap of misunderstanding and Islamophobia have grown together.
Prime Minister, do you think some Western leaders are complicit in exacerbating Islamophobia across the world?
There are Western leaders who have exacerbated it, but I feel out of ignorance, because they do not understand, and I repeat, they do not understand how we feel for our Prophet and our holy book, because they do not have this reverence for their holy book or their Prophet, or religion for that matter. So it is a completely different cultural outlook to religion. And therefore, they inadvertently, in my opinion, make statements which exacerbate the situation.
So how do you think they can fix it?
There is only one way to fix it. We, the heads of Muslim states, should stress on the world bodies, the European Union, the United Nations, world forums. We should stress what the Muslim world feels for our Prophet. And we should explain to them that please do not use freedom of speech and make caricatures about our Prophet, because it causes immense pain. Our Holy Prophet lives in our hearts. And I've always stressed that the pain of the heart is much, 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 much more severe than the pain of physical pain. And we need to make them understand this, because the Jewish community has made them understand that even an interpretation of the Holocaust causes them pain. And so in European Union, in European countries, it's actually an offense to even give your interpretation of the Holocaust. And there are jail sentences for that. So that's how sensitive the Europeans are towards the Holocaust, and quite rightly so, because it causes the Jewish community pain. Similarly, we should be able to make them understand the pain it causes to us, the Muslim community, when they use freedom of speech to cause us immense hurt.
Prime Minister, have we failed as Muslims in making the Western part of the world understand the importance of our Holy Prophet? And why do you think Islamophobia is not treated in the same way anti-Semitism is?
I think because most of the Muslim leadership does not understand Western culture. They look upon Western culture from outside. The reason why I understand it, because I actually lived there and spent a lot of time there. In fact, I had family there. So I understand them much better than the others. And therefore, I feel that Muslim leadership just do not understand what Muslim communities in Western countries go through because of Islamophobia. They do not understand. And so therefore, they have never tackled this issue. Whereas the Jewish community, on the other hand, I mean, they are so cohesive, united, when it comes to any cause that hurts them. And so therefore you see the sensitivity in the Western media, in the Western countries, towards an issue like Holocaust.
Now, Prime Minister, let's broaden the discussion. Certainly after this pandemic is over, there will be a new world order. How do you think Muslim countries can find their place in the new order?
It's a very broad-based, difficult question to answer because there are various aspects to it. Let me just say one thing. What the pandemic has done is that it has caused a huge amount of poverty in the world. The pandemic has hurt the poor all over the world. It has hurt the poor countries more than the richer countries. But it has hurt the poor in all the countries. So even in the richer countries, the poor have been affected. It's they who have been unemployed. It's they who have lost their jobs. Small businesses, the service sector has been hit all over the world. But the poorer countries have been hit more because as it is, they have they're trying to balance their budgets, the expenditure and their revenues, and they tread a very thin line. And so what the pandemic has done, and specifically the lockdown to curtail the pandemic, what that has done is that it has unfortunately rendered so many people jobless. It has reduced the revenues of the governments. So for instance, we lost a huge amount of revenue because of the lockdown. People just couldn't pay. And then to give stimulus package and help those parts of the economy that were suffering, it meant huge deficits for us. And, when you have deficits, you have problems. Richer countries like America, I'll give you an example. The United States, they have already given a stimulus package of $2,000 billion. And they have just given about to give another stimulus, to add to that, another $800 billion. U.S. has a population of 330 million people. Pakistan has a population of 220 million people. The total amount of stimulus we have been able to give is $8 billion. So $2.8 trillion and $8 billion. That's the difference between the resources of the rich and the poor countries. So clearly we cannot protect most parts of the economy. We cannot protect most sections of our population from the worst effects of the pandemic, the lockdowns. And I think it's the case everywhere. There are countries which relied on tourism. Their tourism have been wiped out. Sri Lanka, for one, I was speaking to their prime minister. Then in Egypt, their tourism has affected. So that's a big part of their economy, the income coming from tourism. Then hotels had to be closed. In our case, we had these marriage halls, restaurants, and in our northern areas, the mountain areas, the whole economy used to depend on tourism from within the country. But because of pandemic, people couldn't go there, and so it's caused a lot of poverty in the world.
So, Prime Minister, I have a few more questions on the COVID-19 pandemic, but first I need to address another critical issue with regards to Islamophobia and one particular country, India. Now, Prime Minister, Modi government's policies in Kashmir and Islamophobia has almost become synonymous. More than 500 days, innocent Kashmiris in Indian-occupied Kashmir are living under a siege. We all have faced COVID-19 lockdowns, and it has already made all of us so frustrated for a few weeks. And these people have been facing a lockdown, a siege, for more than 500 days. Yes, the Pakistani government has raised its voice on many platforms across the world, but has there been any progress on the ground?
Just before we go to India, which is a unique case, the other country that is not handling Islamophobia very well is France. I just want to talk about France because, it's the Islamophobia in France is different to what is happening in India. In France, the government has not distinguished between the acts of extremism or terrorism by a member of the Muslim community to what Islam says. So they've equated terrorism to Islam. So they talk about radical Islam and they talk about Islamic terrorism. This is going to have long-term consequences. It's already having consequences in France. But the way they are going, the long-term consequences are much worse. Why? When you say something like Islamic radicalism or Islamic terrorism, basically the entire Muslim community comes under suspicion. Because how do you distinguish, if I am a man in France, how can I distinguish what is a radical Muslim and what is supposedly a moderate Muslim? So anyone going to a mosque for me then becomes a radical. A woman wearing a hijab becomes radical. So it is a big disservice they have done to their own Muslim community living in France by making this false definition. You see, there is only one Islam. There is only one Islam, and that is of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In Muslim communities, like in all human communities, they are moderates. On one, they are extreme, they will be extremists, and the other side, they'll be liberals. Every human community is divided like that. But when a white man walks into a mosque in New Zealand and kills 50 people, no one says it's Christian terrorism.
Yes.
So because he belongs to the Christian community, but no one calls it that. So they will call him a white supremacist or other things. But when a Muslim indulges in an act of extremism or terrorism, then Islam comes into the Islamic terrorism. And as I say, what happens in France is every time an act like that happens, an act of a Muslim terrorism, rather than understanding the reason, and I've already explained, the reason is that Muslims, whenever you make a caricature of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam or insult him, it hurts them. And when it hurts them, there will be sections of the population which will react. And so when they react, rather than understanding that, look, like the Jewish community, they should be more sensitive to, not use freedom of speech to insult or mock our prophet, they then stick to the word that this is attack on France's culture. And then they clamp down on mosques and Muslim communities, who then become ghettoized and actually get more radicalized. And so you've got a vicious circle going in France now. An act will take place. They will then clamp down on, the police will clamp down on the Muslims, looking for these radical Muslims. So the entire Muslim community will have a sense of siege. And amongst them will then grow further radicals. Because marginalization creates radicalization. Now, what is happening in India is...
Prime Minister, before you move to India, have you conveyed these thoughts to President Macron?
Well, I did when he said that, you know, when there was an attack in response to some caricatures on the Holy Prophet in France, Macron said something like, Islam is in danger or something. Islam is in...
It's a religion which is in crisis.
Is in crisis. So I did respond to that because it's ridiculous. As I repeat, does that mean if Christian fanatics or someone, white supremacist, does something and they do in the United States, in Europe, does that mean that the whole, their whole countries are in crisis? So it's ridiculous. And so I responded to that.
Okay.
Because I think they do not understand, and by not understanding the dynamics of what is going on, they're actually perpetuating, they're actually exacerbating the whole Islamophobia and the response.
Right. Now, Prime Minister, talking about India.
You see, India, look, what has happened in India is people need to understand the current government in India is RSS government. RSS government means that RSS was this political party which came, which originated in India in 1920s. But they were inspired by the Nazi party in Germany. And the founding fathers of RSS openly admired Hitler. They admired the Nazis' idea of ethnic cleansing of Jews. They admired purity of race. They were racial supremacists, like the Nazis were. So this is the origin of RSS. RSS was outlawed in India after they assassinated the great founder of India, Mahatma Gandhi, when he was assassinated by an RSS extremist. So it was thrice outlawed in India because they had these cadres who were, you know, like Hitler's brown shirts. They have about 4 million or so of these RSS brown shirts. And they go around beating up people, and just like the brown shirts did in Nazi Germany. Now, when Narendra Modi came to power, remember that he was responsible for a pogrom against the Muslims in Gujarat in 2002, when thousands of Muslims were butchered. And while he was the chief minister, and for 3 days, he allowed it to happen. So police stood back and watched the butchery of Muslims. 100,000 Muslims in Gujarat were made homeless. Their homes were burnt. So this is his background. And sure enough, when he came into power, rather than when you rise to that level, you expect someone to, move towards the center or moderation. Because the previous BJP government was ruled by Prime Minister Vajpayee, who, when he came into power, actually became a moderate. You know, and he was, I think, a statesman who talked about peace. Narendra Modi has moved the other way. He has actually shown his extremist colors. He is basically, India today is a country which believes that India is only for Hindus. It's called Hindutva, the doctrine of Hindutva.
How dangerous is it for the Muslims of India?
It's not just dangerous for Muslims. It will eventually be dangerous for all the minorities. Already, there have been a lot of ethno-religious motivated attack against Christian community in India. But Muslims are the main target because the BJP, this RSS government, blames the Muslims and the Christians of why the Hindu civilization couldn't rise up, because India was ruled for 500-600 years by Muslims, and then for 200 years by the English, who were Christians. So they target basically the two communities right now. But any ideology which is based on racial supremacy, eventually will target all other races, all other religions.
So, Prime Minister, do you think no one but Prime Minister Modi is to blame for the state of relationship between India and Pakistan?
Absolutely. He is responsible because, I know India very well because as a cricketer, India is a cricket-mad country. And so I have had a lot of love and respect in India. And so when I came into government, my first move was to immediately improve our relationship with India. And I called up Narendra Modi and I said, we want to reset our relationship based on trust, and we want to move forward and solve all our issues through dialogue. And I never got any response. Not just did not get any response, in fact, his election campaign was all anti-Pakistan, all how he was going to teach Pakistan a lesson. And, and that's what he did when he came into power when he won the elections, completely on jingoistic, anti-Pakistan rhetoric. He then, when he came into power, that's when he clamped down on Kashmir. Kashmir is a disputed territory between Pakistan and India since 1948, 47. And the United Nations Security Council resolutions, which clearly state that the people of Kashmir were going to be allowed to decide their own destiny through a referendum, through a plebiscite. That plebiscite never took place. India never allowed that to happen because clearly they realized that any plebiscite, because it was a Muslim majority province, they would want to come to Pakistan. Hence, they did not allow that to happen. But there was always, Kashmir had this special status because of the UN Security Council resolution. But 5th August 2019, Narendra Modi did away with that article, that special article which gave Kashmir that special status, Article 370, and just got rid of the special status. But not only that, he is now subsequently trying to change the demography of Kashmir by settling outsiders, Hindus coming into Kashmir, settling them there so that the demography would be changed, so that if in future there is a referendum or a plebiscite, the majority would be Hindus.
Now, Prime Minister, there are well-documented facts that the Indian military is committing atrocities in Kashmir. Now, what I would like to ask you here is, yes, Pakistan is raising its voice on international platforms, in the UN. There are multiple United Nations Security Council resolutions regarding Kashmir, and India right now is in defiance of all those resolutions and international law as well. But what has been the progress on the ground? Kashmiris are still under siege. It's been more than 500 days. Many have lost their lives.
Yeah, what India has done in Kashmir is that a population of 8 million Kashmiris now is under siege from 800,000 Indian troops in the valley. And there are almost daily news of stage encounters where they kill Kashmiri people, Kashmiri youth. Thousands have been whisked away from Kashmir, teenagers. All their senior leadership is more or less in prisons or house arrest. And so in these circumstances, unfortunately, the world has not really, there have been talks. The United Nations Security Council has spoken about it 3 times.
But they have not produced any result.
But that's it. Sadly, nothing concrete is happening. And sadly, also because the United States and Western countries somehow see India as a bulwark against China. You know, they want to build up India as a counterbalance to China, which I think is a huge mistake, because you know, it is they are then, as always happens when you want an ally and you need an ally, then you just in the Western world just does not worry about their human right abuses. This always happens.
Prime Minister, do you think Pakistan needs to deal with the Kashmir issue differently now?
What can Pakistan do? apart from, obviously, the war is never an option between two nuclear-armed countries. So if war is not an option, what else can we do? Approach international forums, which we have done. We have been speaking about it in the United Nations. We are also contemplating lawfare, and in other words, use law to fight a case on Kashmir. But I think Kashmir is an issue which, in my opinion, like the Palestinian issue, is not going to go away if the world thinks that it's just suddenly these people will disappear in thin air. It's not going to happen. This will go on. And in my opinion, by Narendra Modi taking this extreme step, which he has done, by depriving them of their special status, he's basically pushed Kashmir to a point where there are hardly any pro-Indian Kashmiris left. Because previously there were political parties that were pro-India. Today, if there is a free and fair election in India, the sort of oppression that has taken place in Kashmir since 5th August, they pushed the Kashmiris to a point where no political party in Kashmir will survive which is pro-India.
Now, Prime Minister, as you know, President-elect Joe Biden will assume office in a matter of few more weeks from now. What are your expectations from his administration with regards to the Kashmir issue?
Very difficult to say. I have no idea really how the Biden administration will behave. We will, of course, I spoke to President Trump, and twice I spoke to him, and he did offer to mediate between Pakistan and India on Kashmir. But obviously Indians stonewalled it. Let's see. We will again try with the Biden administration. Let's see. We'll try our best.
Now, again, talking about U.S.-Pakistan relations, how do you see the future of relationship between these two countries under President-elect Biden?
Again, difficult to predict what will happen, but what I can say is that we want the U.S. to be even-handed between Pakistan and India. That's all we want. What we do not want is what is happening right now, where India is supposed to be this big ally of the Western countries against China. And I don't understand why there has to be this rivalry with China to a point where you need to have allies so that they counterbalance China. I do not understand this anyway, but I think that this policy is difficult for Pakistan because then the whole thing gets lopsided. India is favored. Pakistan's legitimate rights are ignored. Although Pakistan has, if you look back in the past, Pakistan has given huge sacrifices for United States. We became their partner, frontline state in the Afghan jihad. And after the jihad was over, the U.S. abandoned Pakistan. In fact, slapped sanctions on us. And Pakistan was left with the baby, which meant we had these sectarian groups, we had militant groups in Pakistan, which later on the same U.S. blamed Pakistan for these militant groups. These same militant groups were Mujahideen, helped by the U.S., by the CIA, helped Pakistan, financing them to fight the Soviets. But once they left in '89, the Soviets left, the U.S. abandoned us, we were left with these groups. And same groups come 2001, 9/11. Pakistan then was asked to take on the same groups which had been indoctrinated in jihad, which meant foreign occupation. So when the Soviets had invaded Afghanistan, fighting the Soviets the Mujahideen they were heroes. But when the same people turned against the U.S., when they occupied Afghanistan, they became terrorists. And Pakistan's job was to take care of these terrorists. We paid a huge price for that. Pakistan lost 70,000 people in that. We had suicide attacks going on, insider attacks in Pakistan. So the country suffered. Really, we should have stayed neutral because once we had created these groups who were indoctrinated in jihad, then come a decade later, after 9/11, then we then were, these groups now were terrorists. So, you know, Pakistan got stuck in the middle and we paid a heavy price. And so all we want is that there should be a balance between Pakistan and India as far as the US is concerned. That's really, if you ask me what would we want from the Biden administration, that's what we want.
Okay, now, Prime Minister, moving forward, over the past few months, many countries, especially many Arab countries, have normalized their ties with Israel. Does Pakistan have any such plans?
Look, every country has its own foreign policy, its own interests. So, you know, who am I to comment on whatever they want to do with their foreign policy? But Pakistan, there are two reasons why Pakistan cannot recognize Israel. Number one, the situation in Kashmir is exactly the same situation of Palestine. So if we recognize Israel's takeover of the Palestinian territories, then we also have to recognize what India has done in Kashmir. So number one, you know, that's where we completely lose all moral standing if we are to talk about Kashmir and not about Palestine. Secondly, and much more importantly, the founder of our country was the one and the only great leader for me. And he's the one who people love and respect in this country, and that was Quaid-e-Azam, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Very early, he stated the policy of Pakistan about Israel. And that policy is simple, that unless the injustice done to the people of Palestine is removed, unless the people of Palestine are given their just settlement at a homeland, we cannot recognize Israel. So this is really Pakistan's stated policy.
Prime Minister, do you think this whole topic of normalizing ties with Israel has damaged Pakistan's relationship with some Arab countries?
No, as far as I know, it hasn't, because no one has put any pressure on me, and no one can put any pressure on me, because Pakistan is a democratic country. And if you do a referendum in Pakistan, you will know where the people of Pakistan stand. So there's an emotional attachment of people of Pakistan with what is happening to the people of Palestine, just as they stand with the people of Kashmir. So this emotional attachment with their cause means that anyone in this country who's a democratic leader, if he decides to recognize Israel, he would be going against the will of the people of this country.
Now, Prime Minister, let's talk about the coronavirus pandemic. The way Pakistan handled this pandemic has been praised across the world. How did you do that? Number one. And do you think Pakistan is lagging behind when it comes to vaccines against COVID-19?
Well, the reason we handle it better than other countries is because we realized, you know, that Pakistan's situation was different to the Western countries and to China. Because you see, it spread from Wuhan city in China, and then it went to Europe and the US. And as it was unfolding in Europe, the measures taken by the European countries and the United States and also China, I quickly realized that we do not have the same situation as those countries. And we could not take the similar measures that these countries were taking, because these were rich countries. And even despite being rich countries, I mean, the people in those countries suffered and are suffering today. But in our country, if I impose the sort of lockdown, which, for instance, is right now imposed in England, or in certain European countries right now, or say in California in the United States, we have a large part of a workforce, almost 80%, which is in the informal economy. So, and then we have these daily wages or weekly wages who go and work on a daily basis or a weekly basis to feed their families. And we do not have that sort of social security where we could tell people to be lock down in your houses, and then be able to give them money or provide them food. Unfortunately, we do not have the situation, at least right now. So therefore, I took this decision of a smart lockdown. We then had quickly formed a control and command room, and we started gathering data of where were the hotspots, where this virus was spreading. And we then concentrated on those hotspots, and we used to lock them down. So we did not, for 2 weeks we locked down the whole country because the provinces, everyone sort of panicked, and sort of the provinces started locking down, especially the province of Sindh, where they really suffered because he completely locked down his province. And I couldn't do anything because he comes from the opposition party, the chief minister there. But after 2 weeks, I insisted on them opening up our economy. And starting with agriculture, we knew that if the supply lines from our agriculture sector, if they were disturbed, people would be starving in the cities. So we opened up all the supply lines, did not affect the agriculture sector, and then opened up construction very quickly. And construction is what employs most people in the cities. So those two moves really helped us from going through what other countries, like for instance India, what it is going through right now. We saved our people from crushing poverty by actually taking this decision of a partial lockdown. And actually it became more successful, because when you lock down a whole country where there is a high level of poverty, you cannot impose that lockdown. It's not sustainable, because you cannot lock down hungry people. So that's what happened in India. They tried to lock down hungry people, and there was no lockdown. So in India took a huge battering. I mean, we hardly, we were very lucky. We did not lose that many people compared to all our neighbors.
And what about a vaccine against COVID-19?
Well, we are in touch with the Chinese, and we hope to start vaccinating. Obviously we cannot afford, 220 million people. But the vulnerable sectors of our society, we hope to vaccinate first, which is our doctors and nurses, the frontline workers, and the health sector, and then over 60 people.
Will you take a vaccine against COVID-19?
Well, I'll wait for others to take it first.
Okay. Now, Prime Minister, let's talk about the relationship between Turkey and Pakistan. Certainly, these two countries are not neighbors. They don't share a border, but they are neighbors by heart. But which areas of cooperation between these two countries can be improved under your leadership and under President Erdogan's?
Well, let me say, there's a historical background to relationship between Pakistan and Turkey. And the historical background is that Turks ruled what is now the whole of Pakistan and India. They ruled that for almost 600-700 years, 600 years. And, so Urdu, the language which is spoken in our national language, is littered with Turkish words, because it was, the Turks were really in power here, and the court language Urdu was influenced by Turkish. So, and then there was this one peculiar instance when the Khilafat movement started in Pakistan, when Turkey was being attacked by European forces and it was fighting for its survival. Then people in what is now Pakistan gathered a lot of money and tried to, raise funds for Turkey to fight for its independence in the 20s or early 1920s. So there is a historical linkage between the two countries. But my relationship with Prime Minister Erdogan is based on common values. Both of us believe in this awful that we should do something about Islamophobia. We can never forget the support and help which Turkey has given us in Kashmir. Because, sadly, most of the Muslim countries did not come forward, but Turkey and Malaysia under Mahathir Mohamad really went on a limb to support us after 5th August 2019, when India had sent its, laid siege on the Valley of Kashmir. So, so our relationship is based on common values and, of course, our historic connections with Turkey. And then, future trade prospects. Pakistan is a country of 220 million people. And, the moment we get ourselves organized, this country has great potential of growing. So trade is one of the things which we hope to increase with Turkey.
Now, Prime Minister, you have praised President Erdogan's stance on the Kashmir issue and the causes that Pakistan and Turkey share. How do you find him as a leader?
I think, in my opinion, after Mahathir Mohamad, who I used to, because they transformed their societies. Mahathir Mohamad transformed Malaysia. I believe their per capita was about $600 when Mahathir Mohamad took over, and when he left, it was $9,000. So the hallmark of a statesman is that he transforms a society. And that's what President Erdogan has done. Because we know the state of Turkey, very similar to our state right now, when he took over. And, Turkey has become a formidable country since then. Every country goes through cycles. It has to happen. But, on the whole, if you look at the trajectory of Turkey since President Erdogan took over, Turkey has just become a force.
Now, Prime Minister Khan, my last question to you. As a dog dad myself, how are your dogs?
I can't spend as much time because, I live on a farm basically, and I've always grown up with animals, farm animals, and dogs, of course, are part of farm, very much part of a farm because they, when you have farm animals. But unfortunately, since I've been in government, I haven't been able to give my farm, my animals as much time.
How many are there, by the way?
I have, chicken, goats. I used to have cows and buffaloes, but I have given them away. I only have goats now and chicken, peacocks. I have 4 dogs.
Prime Minister Imran Khan, thank you very much for talking to us on ANews.
Pleasure.